In the early 1970s, I had gotten so frustrated with mechanical problems, costs out of line with the Mercury Comet, that I took the plunge. In 1974, bought a 1973 Volkswagen Bug.
All right. Yes.
In those years, they called it the Super Beetle. Well, it was super because they'd taken that windshield that was like this and they smoothed it out. They'd improved the heater, and it had a stereo radio. Well, it chose the Volkswagen because of its mileage. Its maintenance was good. Parts were universal. And I had a couple of friends who had them, so it was a great deal. And for $1,800. Well, had to take a loan out for that. The Super Beetle was mine. Well, it was ours because we enjoyed it as a family. The kids enjoyed the vacations because they wanted to go in what we called the way back. That was that space behind, the back seat. Well, it was so road worthy. Mileage was great, but because the engine was located in the back over the wheels where the drives were, then it gave it good traction. It was really good in the snow. But the other plus was, one time I got stuck, I slid off the road into the snow, and 4 guys, we just picked it up and put it back in the street, and it was just fine. Well, it so happened I moved to Missouri in 1975 and got reacquainted with a musical friend of mine, Mike, who happened to also own a VW microbus. So we used to swap stories about Volkswagen maintenance. And of course, what always saved it was the VW maintenance guide for complete idiots. And we were able to do that. Oh, it was great, and we talking about it. And so the next year, late spring of 1976, Mike and I decided we were going to test out the Bug with a road trip to Colorado, the Rocky Mountains. Oh, that was great. We loaded it up as much as we could. Mike, just in case we'd find some good skiing opportunities, we put a little luggage rack on the top and mounted the skis, like that down to be, aerodynamic, and headed off. And we were having a great time in the mountains testing out the Bug and my driving abilities. But to sort of top off the trip, literally, was we wanted to go over the famous Tin Cup Pass. Now, we had camped that night before in a little campground outside of the ghost town of St. Elmo. And then next morning we headed up the forest road up toward the pass, past the sign that said, 4-wheel drive vehicles only. But we had a Bug. And me at the wheel. We went up, there was a couple of streams that we forded that were kind of difficult, but we got through. And occasionally we'd have to get out and stop and see, now, if I put the left tire on that rock, then I could get over and get this up rock, and then we could do that. And occasionally we just sort of slide over rock. Because the engine was in the rear, there was no drive shaft, the undercarriage of the Bug was so slick, we would slide over some of those rocks as we made our way. And a few hours later, we had reached Tin Cup Pass, 11,000 feet. Now, there were other 4-wheel drivers that were coming up there, and they'd look at that Volkswagen and said, "You drove that up here?" I said, "What? We airlifted it with a helicopter?" Of course we drove up. Well, we waited a while, and pretty soon we had the pass to ourselves. Got out our lunch, coffee out of our thermos, and we're enjoying the view. Our intention was to head over to the west to Crested Butte, but we were looking back again toward the east down to Mirror Lake. And it was a gorgeous view. Now, we were way up above timberline, and it was late spring, and there was a lot of snow up there, so we were looking at that beautiful snow and thought, well, it's time to head over. And about that time, the clouds began to thicken. Wind began to pick up. It began to snow. Next thing you know, we were in a snowstorm, and as I was turning the Volkswagen around to get maneuvered to go down to the west to Crested Butte, I missed the road. Off we went down the side of the mountain, just crashing and rolling and bumping and so on. And Mike was hanging on, for dear life, and we were both kind of screaming and yelling, and I had no control. And all of a sudden, we just hit a thump, and the bug rolled over into the snow. Remember we had skis put up on the top? Off we went, doing a slalom. We were still sort of yelling and screaming. Of course, we were on the ceiling of the Volkswagen at that time with all our stuff. This was before seatbelts. And we're yelling and screaming and rolling around. We could kind of see where we were going. I could see down there miles away were trees, but there were rocks, but the snow was deep, and just... And I looked out and I said, Mike, we better get out before we crash. So we rolled up the windows, and we're squeezing out, and we're getting up, and I said, maybe it'd be better if we got up on the top of the bottom, and then we could wait for the most important moment and timely jump off. We were just about to do that. Mike says, wait, what about the banjo and the guitar? Oh no, we couldn't leave the banjo and the guitar in there. So I volunteered to crawl back in. Of course, we're doing the slalom. Got out. Good thing for hard shell cases. Banjo and the guitar, we got them up on the bottom of the top. The top of the bottom. And we were going down, and I thought, oh no, look, we were headed into what looked to be like a U-shaped valley. And we were kind of coming in at an angle in the snow, and I realized we were heading into a half pipe. Next thing you know, we went up, and then turned down, and every time we did, we were picking up more speed. I said, I think we better get back in. So there we were while we were doing the U-pipe, trying to get ourselves and the guitar and the banjo back in just about the time we went over the last one up, and it rolled over, back on its tires, but still going down the mountain at quite a speed. Well, we climbed over and got entangled from each other, and I finally got behind the wheel and the steering and the brakes, and nothing was working. We were just going down the mountain, and I could see up ahead there were some trees, and thought, oh, this is going to be horrible. And we missed the trees and headed into what appeared to be a kind of a huge brush pile. I mean, there were limbs and stuff like that. There was no choice. We just went through it. Limbs and leaves and trash and debris and fur were flying all over. I thought it was kind of an unusual place for a beaver lodge, but we kind of plunged through it and started to slow down, almost to a stop when it got dark. And we looked out the windows, and all we could see was fur. Fur. And then we saw sliding off of the front of the Volkswagen was Bigfoot. Sasquatch, 7 or 8 feet tall. And he was angry. We just went through his house. He was growling, and Mike and I were so afraid to scream. We didn't want to do it. We were hanging on to each other. And all of a sudden, he just sort of reached down, got a hold of the front bumper of the Volkswagen, and began to spin. Around and around. I don't know if he was getting ready for the Bigfoot Olympic discus throw or what, but some kind of weird carnival ride. We were just being swung around, and all of a sudden he let go of us, and we went sliding down the mountain, headed for frozen Mirror Lake. There we went. Again, I tried to get in and get control. Nothing was stopping it. We slid out onto the ice, and then I noticed we were headed for open water. I thought, fortunately, the windows are down. Just as we submerge, we'll be able to get out, grab the guitar and the banjo, and we will get out. But we hit that water, and of course I realized, Volkswagen bugs float. So we hit that water, started up the engine, the rear wheels like paddles, the front like rudders, and we just drove right up onto the shore, into the little town of Mirror Lake, found the main street. There was a pizza place. We pulled in, and there told our adventure to each other, and had some really excellent pizza. Oh, and then made our way home after that. Mike and I have told that story many, many times. And everybody says, oh, just another Bigfoot story. But you know what the number one question that people would always ask is there really an excellent pizza place in Fenway? Mike and I say, oh, okay. We just know that we had a ride in a super Beetle. And I call that story Bugged Out.